Welcome, my friends, to the Sage of Quay Radio Hour, your home for free and critical thinking, and I'm your host, Mike Williams. Tonight, my very special guest is Mr. Max Bliss. Max is an independent researcher and an activist, and a very prominent voice in the climate change and geoengineering debate. He was the keynote speaker at the first UK Chemtrail Conference in 2012, and in 2014, he attended the Berlin Climate Engineering Conference, where Max's efforts, along with other activists, resulted in the Berlin Declaration being scrapped. The Berlin Declaration, if it had been approved, would have resulted in a public license to begin experimental deployment of climate engineering technologies. His activism to stop geoengineering is nonstop, and he is well known amongst the elite's climate circles as someone they must contend with. My discussion with Max was wide-ranging and extremely insightful. His knowledge of the true history of the motives and desires behind weather control is very impressive, along with his courage to address the leading geoengineering scientists in their own backyard. My conversation with Max begins with his perspective on how people from across the world can raise awareness in the most effective way in order to enable change. And here is what he had to say.
I'm not a massive fan of protesting, if I'm honest. I've been on quite a lot of protests, and I kind of feel the apathy that people feel afterwards, if nothing happens. It's good if protesting works because you get a positive result. But it depends. I mean, it's good for some reasons, like it builds unity and a sense of purpose. But as far as the establishment is concerned, it would be better if say 1,000 people went on a protest, if 1,000 people wrote letters saying they don't consent to what's happening, rather than 1,000 people turn up and it becomes a situation where they only have to deal with one issue. The government only have to deal with one issue with 1,000 people protesting. But if 1,000 protesters write a letter in saying they don't personally consent to this, then they've got 1,000 issues they have to deal with. So there's different ways to deal with that. There's pluses and minuses.
And these protests many times are infiltrated and they're easily controlled.
In fact, that's another thing that concerns me right now is there is a professional, corporate-funded climate protesting sort of thing going on. There's global marches for climate action. Yeah. And there was one recently, I think it was in December, and you had people like Leonardo DiCaprio speaking at the United Nations at the same time. And he, saying how bad everything is and we have to take climate action. Now, of course, this is all appealing to our thoughts that we're concerned about the planet. Of course, who would not be? Of course we wouldn't. But the reality is you have to look at what is the climate action they're talking about. And they're talking about carbon taxes, cap and trade schemes, where basically it's going to affect the way businesses operate so that that they'll be heavily restricted. Basically it's all about tax. And the only real solutions, if we're supposed to agree that there's a global warming threat, the quick fix solution is solar radiation management, which is spraying aerosols into the atmosphere through various technologies. And the long-term fix is carbon removal from the atmosphere, which is absolute insanity. Because carbon dioxide is not a pollutant as they demonize it and try to make out. Carbon dioxide is a vital trace gas that makes plants grow. And, commercial food growers that have tunnels and greenhouses, they use CO2 generators to increase the speed of their plant growth. And it's quite amazing. It's a huge increase. So, I mean, there's a video you can find online where they do two plants and they've got time-lapse video, and they show the two plants growing, one with normal air and one with extra CO2. And the one with extra CO2 is amazing. It's twice as fast. It's much bigger. It's a healthier plant. The thing is, we need CO2, and they're demonizing it. And it's a real insane agenda to say we must remove CO2, because CO2 is actually our friend. And, there is no real evidence yet to prove CO2 even drives climate. They've got big hiccups. They've got problems, because basically global warming overall has paused. It stopped in 1997. But the CO2 has increased. So if the theory that CO2 drives climate and yet it's carried on increasing but the temperature's paused, there's been, do you know what the temperature increase has been since 1880? Overall, 0 0.85 of a degree centigrade. Okay, that's the big fear thing. That's their fear.
Yeah.
They try and drive that's the reality of it. Since 1880, overall temperatures have increased by 0.85 degrees centigrade. And they say we must keep relative temperature below 2 degrees. To stop temperature rising 2 degrees relative to pre-industrial times. They will mention pre-industrial times. You will see that written in lots of their literature. And the interesting thing, pre-industrial times is before 1850. Now, before 1850, you had the Little Ice Age. In the whole of the Northern Hemisphere, including America and Europe and Greenland and Canada, the whole lot, it's all frozen. The Thames used to freeze over. The River Thames in London used to freeze over. They would have fairs on the Thames itself. And this was a bitter, freezing time. Now, obviously, we've moved on from that. Now, historically, before the Little Ice Age, you had the medieval warm period. Now, this was a period of over 400 years where it was substantially warmer. And it was substantially warm enough that up to 6,000 Vikings were living in Greenland for 400 years. And then something happened. They built stone houses. There was 2 towns, basically. They had churches, they had town halls. They were proper towns. And, the infrastructure for the medieval type of towns was there. They had no electricity, obviously. They had no access to modern agriculture, which came with the Industrial Revolution. So they were living the hard life. And of course they had 3 months where it was complete darkness because of where they were in the Northern Hemisphere. So they were able to grow all their own food. They were even making beer. They obviously had enough trees for cooking and for heating. And that they survived for 400 years. And then suddenly, dramatically, within a decade or something, they all disappeared. And it's a big mystery. Now they've established, well, it looks like they were starving to death. It looks like something happened to the climate. It looks like it got very cold. And that was the onset of the Little Ice Age. And the Little Ice Age, amazingly, lasted approximately 400 years. So it's another 400-year period. So what would we get following? You had a medieval warm period for 400 years. Then you have the Little Ice Age for 400 years. I'm not saying it's definitely going to be the same, but I know one thing, it's going to get warmer after the Little Ice Age. So pre-industrial times, which is the Little Ice Age, and they're worried saying, we don't want it to rise 2 degrees. Well, it's inevitable it's going to rise 2 degrees because we're not remaining in the Little Ice Age. So the question is, they're fooling everybody. They're lying to everyone, and that's not a question, but that's what they actually are doing. They are using this global catalyst for fear catalyst to make massive changes. And their massive changes are the United Nations Climate Treaty in 2015 in December. They've got 500 new climate laws for this year. They've got a whole raft of treaties, and ultimately we're moving into Agenda 21. Sustainable development, and what they're calling it now is post 2015 agenda. So the latest set of documents you'll find pertaining to sustainable development is called the United Nations post 2015 agenda, and it's swiftly moving on. It starts to include things like the Internet of Things and cashless society and the bioeconomy, where all food will be GMOs with nanotechnology in it and smart plants. And obviously they want to move. Anyone that's looked into Agenda 21 will realize about smart grids and about basically every single human being on this entire planet, no one left behind, being completely monitored 24/7, 100% of the time, even in your home with smart meters linked up to all your Internet of Things equipment. So basically they can monitor you all the time. And this is worse than the Big Brother from 1984. This is worse than Brave New World. Their next stages are human engineering. And incredibly, this is what I learned at the last climate engineering conference I went to that human engineering is a part of this agenda. That they literally want to that there is a clear mandate within governments for converging sciences. Converging sciences is like a little phrase that you'll find if you do a search for that, and you'll come up with nanotechnology, bioscience, neuroscience, and information communications technology. And these emerging sciences are going to converge and merge with biodiversity. So basically, they're going to use the technology to change our DNA, so that includes nanotechnology as part of our DNA. So we'll all be walking around with technology. It's a part of our living being.
Right.
And this is where this is all going from climate change. It's a huge leap, and it's hard for a lot of people to grasp. However, this information is open source material. It's not top secret stuff.
That's the thing. That's the thing I tell people is if you read their white papers and their strategy papers, this is not a theory. I mean, they're putting this stuff out there, and if you know enough to look and where to look, you're going to read this stuff and you're going to figure it out.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing, Max, is, clearly before what you were saying is, the planet goes through its cycles, and clearly they are lying. They are playing on the fact that they know most of the population is ignorant to what this really means. When we talk about global warming and we talk about the planet, most people do not do the research. They do not do their homework. And so people buy into this lock, stock, and barrel because, as you mentioned, most people are going to sit there and say, hey, I want to do the right thing by the planet. And that's how they kind of camouflage. Don't you want to save the planet? But the question becomes, what are they doing with the spraying? In other words, I know you touched on it a little bit now with regards to the overall agenda, but what do you see as the primary reasons that the spraying is in place? What are they doing? Is it just weather modification, warfare, transhumanism, enhanced communications for military purposes, all of the above?
Primarily for weather control. The documents I've been researching, and I've really been researching solidly now for 3 years, and the pursuit of weather and climate modification is over 100 years old. And we're talking serious people, like people of their day. Back in the end of the 19th century, you had people like J.J. Thomson, who was a fellow of the Royal Society, people like Oliver Joseph Lodge. These were eminent physicists of their days who would rub shoulders with people like Edison and Tesla and people like this. These were top people in their field, and they had patents. Well, J.J. Thomson was at a weather. He was at a symposium in Sheffield in 1910, and he said it would only take a modest amount of electricity for wide-scale weather modification. Now he's like a leading scientist of his day, leading man. Another guy, that of Oliver Joseph Lodge, in 1905, he has a patent for directing electrical energy into the atmosphere to alter the weather by basically directing negative charge energy would create rain or create cloud, and positive charge would dissipate cloud. So the understanding of this is quite old now, and this technology, obviously, we can imagine what technology, if they've got a patent to do this, to alter the weather, to make it rain. There are companies operating right now doing this, by the way. Like there's one called AQS, there's another one called Aquarius, there's a Russian one. There are different companies doing this all around the world, using electromagnetic frequencies to direct energy to ionize a region of the atmosphere, to change it, to make it rain, or to dissipate it, or direct rain. So this technology is quite old, and what I kind of try to look for is how good is the foundation? How long have they been developing this technology, and how realistic are those patents to be working? How far could they have progressed? And I think looking at the commercial operations that are running today, the patent from 1905 was extremely accurate and likely to have been working. So looking at that, how far could the technology have moved on in over 100 years? Tremendous. We look at, in 1959, there was a film or a program made by Walt Disney, but it was on a science factual idea. It's called Eyes from Outer Space. And I'd recommend anyone go to watch this. And it's about a 25-minute sort of documentary science fiction, but it's based science factual. And they've taken their advice from the US Air Force and the various laboratories and stuff. And they talk in this movie about how they would stop a hurricane hitting landfall in America, and the different techniques: cloud seeding, robotic planes, which are drone planes, cloud seeding from the ground using towers with electricity shooting off them, changing the high pressure to block it. And all of this technology they're talking about in 1959 is proven technology that we can see that's used today. So this type of longevity to this program, this desire for weather and climate control, I mean, it's quite openly talked about in the 60s, even the 70s, about a worldwide weather watch, 3 Ws, worldwide weather watch. And you will find that all nations are working together to control the climate, wide scale weather modification. Even JFK talked in 1961 at the United Nations Assembly on the 25th of September, and he said that all nations would work together to accurately forecast and eventually control the weather. So there's certainly, at the highest levels, you've got an agenda to control the weather and climate. Now, we'd have to look at that. Why is that of importance for them? Of course, a lot of this is military, because if you've got people that you're having a conflict with, you can deny them water, you can create problems for their water and food supply, you can even hamper them with seriously bad weather, like they did in Vietnam with Project Popeye. Right. And interestingly, Project Popeye was denied when that was first exposed. It ran from 1968 to 1972. That was questioned in Congress, and it was all denied. No, it's not happening. And then somehow a whistleblower got the evidence out, and a guy called Senator Claiborne Powell, he was very upset about it, and he really pushed. And because of his interest in this, he managed to push forward and get the NMOD treaty put in place, which is an environmental treaty to stop using weather weapons as warfare. So the technology is there. So establishing that this is there. Now the question is, what would their motives be? And it's to create the illusion that there's a climate problem, because this is the global threat that will galvanize all the different nations together underneath this umbrella, that they must all act against this global threat and bring in one world government through the United Nations using the Agenda 21 Sustainable Development United Nations post-2015 agenda. These massive programs that affect every single nation, or 192 nations at the moment, and maybe there might be more. So we're talking the bulk of the whole world, and anyone who isn't a part of it, they get labelled a rogue nation. And, strangely enough, they have some sort of conflict. So there's a war put on them. So basically, it's all about globalization. This is, I think this is relatively verifiable. I don't think there's any particular area of weakness in this hypothesis, that basically they are using technology. I'm pretty certain we can demonstrate they are using this technology. I don't believe that the facts will support that there is really a global problem from the point of view of anthropogenic global warming. The data's, there's too many instances of ClimateGate scandals, where including NASA, NOAA, the UK Met Office, the Climate Research Centre, and various other Met offices around the world have all been caught skewing their data, homogenizing the data, making it fit models, basically trying to support this whole agenda that there is a climate problem. So I can see chemtrails spraying things into the atmosphere. I prefer to think of them as induced contrails, really, because they are contrails. And if people want to get anywhere with the establishment and they want to address the establishment directly, which I would highly recommend to everybody, voice your concerns, you should be talking about contrails, because this is what they are. Now, what we think they are is chemically induced contrails. So there's something added into the exhaust plume or possibly into the fuel oil in all manner of ways. There's so many different patents that demonstrate it can be done in different ways, that there is something being added to create a contrail. And these contrails can act in different ways. They can expand, they can spread, they can block out the sun. Clouds are absolutely critical to climate regulation. With clouds, you can trap heat in, you can block heat out, you can scatter light away, you can move vapor from one region to another region, you can create high pressures, low pressures, so you can really play with the climate. So by creating contrails and by creating contrail cirrus, artificial clouds on a wide scale, that in itself, done in strategic locations, is a key part of a worldwide climate control program. So that is a part of it. And I believe this will lead to changes in food supply, because if you're controlling the weather, there's obviously the fallout issue, whether if they're using a lot of aluminium, that will start to change the pH of the soils. So then you've got companies like DuPont and Monsanto and various other big agro companies who have patents for aluminium resistant foods, a huge selection of even aluminium resistant trees. So they're prepared. Now, one could argue that that's because there may be an increase in acid rain, because they're talking about, with solar radiation management, spraying sulfuric acid into the atmosphere. And that's the problem we had before with acidic rain. Now, acidic rain will then make more aluminium leach out of the soil. They could argue that. They could argue that's what they're doing it for. But the reality is there's so many different rainwater analysis being done by concerned activists all around the world that are coming back with higher than normal amounts of aluminium. And even just to support that from official sources, in 2004, the UK Civil Aviation Authority finally did an cabin air quality investigation, because so many pilots and frequent flyers were becoming ill and having problems with flying that there were so many complaints and so many incidents, and there are still to this day, where pilots have to put on gas masks, oxygen masks to land a plane because they've become dizzy and they've lost their orientation because of so-called fume events, where basically the cabin air is questionable because the air comes from outside, but it also passes through the engine through a bleed air valve. That's where the cabin air inside an aeroplane is 50% atmospheric air and 50% recycled air. So they did this analysis, and the peak materials that were found were aluminium and silicon, interestingly, and a whole host of other ones, but they were the peak materials. So that there's some proof that there's aluminium coming into the air duct system, and their only hypothesis is that this aluminium may come from lubricating oils from the engines. They're trying to sort of come up with some excuse. And interestingly, there is now an illness which has been developed called aerotoxic syndrome, which they believe is because of these oils that may be getting burnt and entering into the air system and introducing various toxins into the air. But this all coincides exactly with the development of people spotting trails in the atmosphere. And, the timing, the fact that the CAA had to do this investigation in 2004 is exactly the right timing, with all the people being concerned about chemtrails and changes in the sky. And there are also reports of the increase in clouds. So if we look to the Arctic, NASA and NOAA, they've done reports and investigations to prove that the last 20 years has had a linear increase in cloud cover, which would support the idea that there are creating clouds with the contrails. So there is evidence there to support there is a massive increase, which I think is above the increase in the amount of planes. So the old idea, it's only because there's more planes. That's kind of ridiculous, especially if you live somewhere underneath busy air corridors, like servicing busy airports. You would imagine if contrails the amount of contrails we see today, and persistent ones, which are the ones more striking, if they were normal and we'd seen them all our lives, first they wouldn't need to really be educating about them today, because we'd have known about them anyway, because they would be commonplace and we'd see them and no one would even be questioning them.
Right.
But, like, for example, I used to live in the south of England, underneath the air corridor servicing London. And you can imagine that London has some very, very busy airports. And basically, there are no real contrails in the sky up until the mid-90s. And even then there weren't really many in the mid-90s. There's only really after 2000 that really started to be a big change. So how can anyone argue, we only see contrails now because there's more planes flying? Yeah, but it doesn't really apply if you live underneath the busiest air corridors, does it? You should have seen them anyway. How busy does it have to be? So no, there is a change. It's visible, it's recordable, the evidence supports it, and something is going on. And I'm certain it's to bring about this globalization. It's one world government system. It's food control is a part of it, because with food they can change humans, because GMO foods. See, with Agenda 21, there's something called the bioeconomy. Right? And anyone who's concerned about GMO foods should look into what the bioeconomy is. It's a key part of Agenda 21. So basically, they're saying is because of the overpopulation problem, which I believe is a total myth. Everything's just bad management. It's crazy. I've lived in Australia. I've travelled around Europe. I live in France now. I've been to America. I've been to India. I've been in Asia. I can tell you, it's not overpopulated. It's designed to congest cities,
right, and
give you the feeling you're overpopulated. But that's because that's where they're controlling society. If you actually were, for example, if you drove across from coast to coast in America, I think and then always had in your mind, we're overpopulated. I think most people who did that trip would say, no, we're not overpopulated. It's ridiculous. There's vast open regions. And it's the same even in India. You've got millions of hectares of jungle and all sorts of land. It's just how it's all managed. There's no doubt with the bioeconomy, skipping back, the GMO food, this is all supposedly to save us, because we need a sustainable food option, is what they're saying, what they're suggesting. And they are pushing hard for this. This is almost like a done deal. This is where they're going. It's already going to happen. It's just about us agreeing to it. All the elites, all the companies, all the corporations, they're already planning for it. It's already happening as far as they're concerned. It's only the people that have the power to stop this, because everyone else is for it. But basically, they want to put nanotechnology inside food. And in fact, in 2010, the House of Lords Science and Technology Committee in the UK, there was a report about introducing nanotechnology into food. So this has already been addressed. This is already moving forward, and I believe there already is nanotechnology in some foods. And the question is, nanotechnology is at an infant stage. Where do they want to take it? Well, they want to take it so that this nanotechnology becomes an integral part of all living things.
And so, Max, what do they do with the nanotechnology? Once it's in the body, what do you see happening to humans once this technology is inside them biologically?
Well, they talk about nanotechnology being the next industrial revolution that's going to transform life on this planet. And it's set to be in three stages of development. By 2020, a lot of programs are coming to the end of their development, and from 2020 will be the first major stage. I mean, we're already in that stage because nanotechnology is becoming more familiar. It's being used to microsize electronics, for example. But basically, where they want to take this, and it's like I said, again, this is not a theory, this is open source material. They want to have something called the Internet of Things, where everything will be connected. completely connected. There's something going to be called the outer net, where it's called Web 3, where there's going to be satellites connecting everyone. So the whole planet will have free internet, which will sound great and all the kids will love it. But what it will mean is all the technology they're putting into place will be connected all the time. So the Internet of Things is that all things will be connected via the Internet and completely interacting, communicating. There's whenever you hear the word smart means self-monitoring, analyzing, and reporting technology. So what they want to do is smart plants, smart grids, smart cars, smartphones, everything with smart as a prefix means that it's reporting, it's analyzing and reporting. So, what we're looking at is a future age rapidly coming into view. This is almost here. We're so close to it. People have been groomed, especially the young, to become reliant on devices. When you see children now waiting at the bus and all talking to each other on their mobile phones or texting or Facebooking or something, they're all looking down. They're completely relying on this technology. Well, the idea is the next stage is, they say at the moment people wear their technology. They practically wear it because they have it with them all the time and it's in their pocket or wherever, so you're wearing it. The next stage is for this technology to become a part of you. The idea would be, the sell is, you'll have technology in your eye so that you don't actually need a camera anymore. You can communicate now. Telepathy is possible, so we can communicate with each other. So basically, they can come inside your brain. This is where it's coming towards, and they call this the singularity. This is what transhumanists call the singularity, where everything will be communicating and everything will be connected so that it becomes a single entity. And this is what they want for the future, where society is so interconnected and so controlled, we're no longer free thinkers. It's the last freedom we have at the moment. We all live now as free-range slaves, and a lot of us don't mind the perks we have. A lot of us have good lives and whatever, and you're quite happy with it. But the truth is, you have to pay your taxes. You're completely controlled. You can't even travel to another country without having to prove some documentation who you are.
Right.
You can't just travel the earth as an animal. Everything is controlled. Everything. You're a free-range slave. Well, they're not happy with that because it's dangerous. Because all the while you can think for yourself, you might start realizing what's happening, and then you might start talking to your friends, and that they will realize, and then all of a sudden they've got a problem, because which they have now is that people are waking up and they're realizing, I don't want to live as a slave. I'm not happy with free range slave status. In fact, I don't want to be a slave at all. What they're in a race to do is to stop people waking up and basically saying, I don't like the system. I don't need to be governed. I don't need someone telling me what to do. I'm an adult. I can think for myself. So they're racing to get this technology in place before sufficient number of people say, you know what, we don't even want the government anymore. Why should we have a government? Why don't we have a system of self-governance where we have real democracy in place? Why have the power of decisions just in a small group of people? Why not allow, with this technology, everybody to make a vote on every decision, an informed vote where we can work out what's going on, and collectively everybody make a decision about their future? That's what they're frightened about, because that's what should happen as we move on and we realize that these custodians that are bringing about these horrific programs, they've got a bad track record. They're warmongers. They're toxic polluters. They're the ones that do all the polluting on our planet. None of us are industry leaders creating plastic, creating toxins, pouring fracking chemicals into the ocean.
Exactly.
And, none of us are doing that.
Right.
And we're taking the blame. We're supposed to be the ones saying, we're the ones creating climate problem. No, we're not. We're not. Animals, if we weren't here, animals were there. There's always been life here. There's always been methane and CO2 going around. There's always been more CO2, actually. And it's ludicrous. And basically, this situation is like a neck and neck race. between people waking up and sufficiently to just reject the system and to change it by numbers. You know, I mean, what we're looking at is a small group of criminal elites that have been playing what they call the Great Game. If you look up the Great Game, there was a Great Game in Europe between Russia and the British Empire, but there's a new Great Game that Prince Andrew talks about, where basically they are in a race to make sure that they can get their infrastructure in place to control us all. And the race is, can we realize in time to stop the infrastructure being put in place and remove those people who are steering that infrastructure, those ones that are putting this in place? And it's a phenomenal machine, but most of the people involved are compartmentalized on a need-to-know basis, have no idea, or are sold on propaganda and are, you know, they're conned, basically. A lot of these scientists, I've talked to a lot of these scientists now, personally, eyeball to eyeball, and I can tell you they don't have peripheral vision. They can't see what's going on outside, what they're focusing on. That's all they do. They just work on their area, and that's it. You know, and it's quite frightening in a way that these people aren't developed, you know, in a broader sense. All they do is completely focus in on one particular area, and that makes them very vulnerable to being conned, being compartmentalized.
What happens, though, Max, when you speak to them? Do they listen, or do they go into denial? What's their response?
Well, that will vary on each individual case. It depends. I would say, on my experience, I was talking to hundreds of scientists at the last conference I was at, and I was fortunate. It was a 4-day conference. So I had a lot of time to talk to people. From that, I felt I made some very good contacts. There were some really great people there, and they were from all over the world. Literally, there were people in attendance from everywhere. I found the majority of them to be really good people, but a core of what I would say were the veteran scientists that we see, like Alan Roebuck, Ken Caldera, and the like. These people were either completely aware of what the real program is and just frightened to talk about it. They were literally frightened, especially Ken Caldera. They're in denial. I don't know. I actually think there's a core group of scientists who know very well that this is a con, and maybe they believe that it's better to manage society. Maybe I don't know. I've talked to other scientists at the UK Met Office when I talked to them, and they agreed finally that there was some aerosol program going on. So I actually have a couple of scientists from the UK Met Office who admitted to me off the record that they are aware of an aerosol program going on to control the weather. But other ones that I talked to, they said, well, there's too many people on the planet anyway. You know, there's this kind of propaganda that's really ingrained in them, that they believe they're doing a service because there's too many people. They believe the Rockefeller propaganda that's been there for decades, that humanity is the enemy of the planet. But that's not all of them. I would say the majority of them. I have a lot of positive feelings coming from this conference. I really felt I reached a lot of the people. We made a lot of progress, and I had some really engaging conversations. Like I say, I've got some good contacts with these people now, some of them. So I'd say that it was a small percentage that were hardcore, and the rest of them were you know, approachable, respectful, willing to speak. And surprisingly, at the end of the conference, we had an awful lot of them coming up to us, sharing their ideas. Because we asked a lot of pertinent questions. We really did challenge the status quo, and reasonably well.
Are you talking about the Berlin Climate Engineering Conference? Is that
Yeah.
the conference? Okay. What is the forum like in which you can have input? Are you in the audience? Are there breakout sessions? How does that interaction take place?
Well, there were various different methods. There were different discussions. There were panel discussions. There were presentations. There were workshops. There were sort of like town hall discussions. There were whole different formats, even some where you played games and stuff like that. And I mean, overall, you could tell there was a bit like the Delphi technique type thing, where there was an overall position they wanted everyone to arrive at the end of the conference. You know, they wanted to drum up support, basically, to move towards allowing a public license for a further climate action. You know, they wanted solar radiation management. Is what they wanted. So you had a lot of opportunity to interact and play games and talk and discuss.
Is the buy-in, though, Max, is it a charade at the end of the day? What I mean is, are they just going to go do it anyway? And that this whole thing where they have conferences and you know, they pretend that people actually have a say and input, the Delphi technique, right?
I actually felt, well, I'll give you an example, a solid example. The purpose of that conference was it was a transdisciplinary conference where they had different people that would be connected, some from law, some engineers, different types of climate scientists, oceanographers, all sorts of different types of people that were connected. And of course, a handful of members of the public, which were purely just activists, you know, that we realized we need to be there. There were 6 of us.
Now, how did you get invited to it? Did you invite yourself, or did they extend an invitation to you?
No, I found out about it. Somebody gave me a tip-off, and I just paid to go, and I just attended. And interestingly, you know, you have a badge with your name on it, and the institute or organisation you represent, and you go around wearing your badge, and so when you talk to people, they can know your name and who you're with. So my website is called therealinstitute.com. So I just had the Real Institute on there. So, you know, I was able to talk to people, and they weren't quite sure whether I was just a member of the public or whether I was, you know, some academic or whatever. So it was quite interesting because you could then engage in conversations quite freely, and there was lots of meals and opportunity for people to discuss what they had. But the overall agenda, first of all, was to inform all these people from different areas of the latest situation and the technology that they aim to use to tackle the problems. And what they asked at the welcome talk was, could you all take a copy of the Berlin Declaration, which was just an A4 piece of paper with text filling one side with all the reasons why they wanted to be able to regulate the development of experimentation for solar radiation management. So what they were looking for was a public license to begin deployment of experiments. Now, I've talked to David Keith personally, and he admitted to me after I pushed him with various questions that the only way to know if solar radiation management would actually work globally is to deploy it globally. You can't just do a field experiment. I mean, they've already done field experiments by doing sprays and seeing how material reacts in the atmosphere. So they've already got to that stage. The next stage is to actually deploy it on a large scale. That's the only way they can see whether or not it's effective. And I did get that out of David Keith. I've got that on video. You can't deny it. So this Berlin Declaration was worded in such a way that some people, if you weren't really paying attention to it, what they were trying to say is we need to govern this so that private geoengineers, because you had that one in Canada where he dumped a load of iron into the ocean.
Yep.
So that was an interesting one, isn't it? Because now they can say, oh, billionaires can go and do it themselves. We need to regulate this. We must get the governance in place. Basically, we need to police this. We need to get this in place, is what they're saying. So with this declaration, the idea was you would listen to the 4-day conference, and at the end, we would discuss this. It would be a town hall meeting, and they would look at, and people were supposed to sign this declaration, and that would be not legally binding, but there is a kind of an implication that if a lot of people were informed and would agree to it, it's like a public license. Now that was rejected. And I have to say, I know for a fact that there was a number of us, like I said, I think there's 6 of us in total. We separated ourselves out so that we could go to every single presentation and ask pertinent questions. Not ridiculous questions just to cause trouble, because it would be stupid because we wouldn't get anywhere. These are only questions that really mattered, raising important points, just to challenge the status quo. Well, it was rejected. And I talked to a guy called Clive Hamilton, who's one of the guys that always goes on tour promoting climate change and we need to take climate action. And he was talking to me, confiding in me, saying, "Oh, well, did you go to the town hall meeting?" And I said, "I didn't actually go because I was doing something." And he said, "Oh, you missed a bun fight." He said, "There were so many different conflicting opinions, it got scrapped and it's thrown out. It's put us back years." And I thought to myself, well, that's amazing. That proves that we can be effective. Now, at the end, there was a big meal and everything, and there were lots of people talking. And they told us that we would talk at a conference. The activists, those that were asking the questions, we stirred up people's thoughts. Mm-hmm. And that sufficiently that the Berlin Declaration got scrapped. Now, I look at that, okay, as a minor victory, but it proves that this thing isn't sewn up in a bag. This isn't guaranteed. And my viewpoint now is to try and reach as many people within the establishment who are compartmentalized, who are not aware of the bigger picture, to bring them up to speed and at least get them to a position where they're informed and they can make a decision based on being fully informed rather than partly informed to the bigger picture. And of course, get as much public support, because the public do make a difference. And if more people phoned up all the time saying, "I'm not happy with these trails in the sky, I can see the climate's been changed, all these extra clouds that are formed from these aeroplanes, they're affecting my climate. I've now got moss and fungi on my trees, and this has been a big difference in the last 2 years, and in the shade, moss is boss." This is why we're seeing a massive increase, because we are living in shade, because of all these artificial clouds. Now, anybody can draw that conclusion, and it's verifiable and it's provable. You can start phoning up your EPAs, your Environmental Protection Agency. You can start phoning up different departments in the establishment, even universities that are doing climate change, and start complaining to them, saying there's obviously a program going on. What I'm trying to say is that these people manage to get away with this because they're not being challenged. When we went to this climate engineering conference, I felt that if we were not there, then they would have got their Berlin Declaration. And it only took 5 of us or 6 of us. So people can make a difference. There were hundreds of academics and scientists there, and just 5 of us asking the right questions at the right time, in a measured and paced way. We weren't hysterical or anything. We were just delivering the information at the right time, challenging the status quo. And it's the truth. It's powerful, so people can make a difference, and everyone is capable of doing this.
What happens, Max, when I'm assuming somebody asked a question, or the question leaned into the fact that, hey, look, you guys are talking about something you want to do, but this is, obviously already underway. Does anybody ever admit to the fact that, yes, we are spraying, there is an aerosol program, or is it just flat out denial when you go to these conferences?
Denial.
Unbelievable.
Denial.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah. Even we were fortunate enough. I didn't realize this when I first contacted them, and I talked to Stefan Schroeder. He was the man in charge of the steering committee for the conference, and I was hoping, I called him last minute, but I was hoping I would actually try to give a presentation at the conference. That was my wish for the conference. That if I could give a presentation, I'd be delighted, because I want an opportunity to tell these people, to share my information. And basically he was humming and ahhing about it, but I was trying to share information to give him the idea that I was researching and I was informed. And I said to him, I guess you already know that there are 500 new climate laws for 2015. And there was a pause, and he's actually, no, I didn't know that. So, okay, this is serious. 66 nations have agreed to 500 new climate laws for 2015, and you don't know about this. This is crazy. You're right there at one of the world's most important institutions in Potsdam in Germany, which has been set up purely for this, with scientists from all over the world there. And you don't even know there's 500 new climate laws. But unfortunately, they didn't say. They said to me after a little bit more communication, he said, "No, it won't be possible simply because." And I respect that he was telling the truth, that it was too late in the day. Everything was already organised. But what happened was we were able to give an ad hoc presentation, and Ken Caldera was there, Mark Lawrence, and a few others, and we were able. We split between 5 of us to give. It was 5 of us actually to give everyone a fair go. We'd break it down. We'd all have like 7 minutes each or something like that, which is a bit disappointing actually, because I would have preferred the 45 minutes. But we had an opportunity, and we had some, shocking pictures, lots of information, and I'd love to do it again. And I look forward to the next opportunity to there's more information I learn all the time. But basically, there were shocking pictures. And they were trying to say, well, I've got some people that would be able to explain that. And I used to be one person, Mark Lawrence. He's like the world leading person in his field in climate science and whatever. And it's like, well, how can you explain this, Mark? That I see this every single day.
Yes.
And I've got enough photographic evidence now, or for the last 3 years solid, where I take pictures every single day as a record, because I want to know. I started doing it because I was just shocked, and then afterwards, when I got fed up with taking pictures of the same thing all the time, and of course they do vary actually. So my early pictures, the chemtrails look different to some of the modern, more recent pictures, because of the development of the program. That obviously this program is in complete development, it's evolving as we go. So I've got pictorial evidence of the changes, but it's the frequency. The idea you can have a contrail in the atmosphere has discrete atmospheric conditions necessary for a contrail to form. Now you can't get those discrete conditions every single day.
That's right.
I'm sorry, they were once rare, and now they happen every single day. And if you're lucky enough to get through the cloud blanket to see them, it's obvious. And these people, I kind of was left with the feeling that the ones at the top know very well it's going on, and I do know that they certainly pay attention to what we say. Like, for example, when I went to see David Keith, they were already informed that I was going. I knew that they knew me. When I arrived and I was sitting down there, I heard someone behind who was a member of the Oxford University there saying, "Is Max Bliss here?" And I heard it, it echoed down. I heard it, and it was like, oh my God, they're prepared. They already know. So, they can only know me from YouTube or Facebook or whatever, I find that amazing that they must be paying attention to what we're sharing on our YouTube videos and so on.
They absolutely are. And it's just, you're telling this story and they are just so despicable. I live in North Carolina in the United States, Max, and they spray here virtually every single day. And over the last week, I have seen spraying here that just is mind-numbing. It's the worst I have seen it in a long, long time. And in fact, last night, they were spraying at night. The moon was shining, and I could see these crisscrosses and tic-tac-toes across the sky. It's really amazing. And they just sit there and they deny it.
I know, which when you look into the longevity of the development of weather and climate modification, and you realize how many decades they've been developing this program, you have to realize, I've literally got documents from different scientific institutions all around the world, right? As JFK said in 1961, all nations are working together on this. They are working together. I've got a bulletin, an atomic bulletin, the atomic bulletin from 1967. And in there's a little paragraph where they're talking about Moscow, Washington, Melbourne, and various other different cities all working together on this worldwide weather watch for a wide-scale weather modification. So in their own academic journals, you can find from 1967, they're quite openly talking about it. Forget the Cold War. The Cold War is an illusion. That like the Soviets have been working together with the West for weather modification. They wanted, and have quite openly talked about, melting the Arctic region for well over 100 years. And that was quite openly talked with the National Science Foundation right up to the mid-60s. Targeted ozone depletion, so that they would literally, all they've got to do is spray chlorine or bromine or various other things like aluminium oxide from chemtrails, possibly if they use. I mean, chemtrails, I believe, could be made of lots of different things, lots of different ways to make chemtrails. But obviously, aluminium, barium, and strontium are ones that have been very popularized. But there's lots of ways to destroy ozone. And we've got people like Harry Wexler, who was a very world-renowned weather expert in his day during the 40s, 50s, and 60s, describing ways on how they could alter the climate, how they can control the climate. We've got people like Vladimir Sorokin. He's an important guy to look up. And in 1945, he's talking about various different ways. I mean, he was a television guy. He was a guy that worked with directing frequencies, but he was invited to become part of this massive weather control program. What I'm trying to get to is this is massive, and they have to know. If they don't know, how incompetent can they be?
Right.
How, it's just ridiculous, And I think actually one of our next steps to take will be to create a dossier of information and inform these people and put them on legal notice that they have been informed, and that they can't deny that they haven't been informed, that the knowledge of what's going on. Personally, I know from I went to the UK Met Office HQ in Exeter, and I've got a van I've painted up with all sorts of stuff with chemtrails, big, lots of signs and information, everything about the New World Order and whatever. So this van's quite an eye-catching van, and I drive it around. It's a really fantastic way to get the message out, talk to people. Lots of people want photos with it, and they want to know more information, and it's really woken up a lot of people. Well, I drove this to the UK Met Office from France, and I went and I parked up outside their HQ, and I stayed there for the afternoon for about 5 hours. And there were lots of people coming up. There was people looking all sheepish, and they didn't want to speak to me, but they were just being nosy. And then other people would talk to me. I had a load of leaflets made up, and I was with information about artificial weather and what's happening to the climate. And I had some very interesting conversations, and I had a conversation in particular with one particular scientist from there. I had several conversations, but one particular stands out. And we went through the little chemtrail-contrail loop argument, where it's just a contrail, whatever. And as we were standing there, they were doing plenty of fresh chemtrails. It was just perfect timing. And incidentally, we had the red arrows fly over us and do one spray just over us, which was really quite strange. The skywriting planes from the Royal Air Force, they flew over us and they just did one spray right over us, and as if like, are they taking the mickey out of us or something? To say it's a chemtrail or whatever. But this scientist, I'm talking to him for about 25 minutes, and after we've gone through the loop argument, he's been very civil and basically pushing our boundaries of our knowledge and getting to the point where we realise, okay, it's a chemtrail. But what really cracked it was that in France, or where I live in France, that particular year, a lot of the trees and plants all were suffering badly, more than they are now. I mean, they still are. But all the leaves were mottled, they were discoloured. There were serious problems that were catching my attention. I was taking pictures across all species, didn't matter what it was. There were lots of problems with them. And when I drove to England, every time I stopped for a break or whatever, I was looking, is it the same problem? Is it something where I am? Or is this the same problem? All the way through France, all the way through England, same problem. All the trees, they're all mottled leaves, discoloured, problems. Tops of trees dying because the roots aren't taking up enough nutrition. There's problems with them. And this scientist, when we were sort of struggling with the chemtrail contrail loop argument, I started saying to him, listen, I grabbed a leaf from some foliage that was near us, then one from this tree, then one from that tree, then one from another tree, all different things. And I said, look, they're all suffering. There's something wrong with them. There's an immune problem. Something's happening to them. And he just suddenly went, oh, it's because they're spraying recycled batteries. And then he said, I shouldn't have said that. And I was like, what? And I couldn't believe it. And it was like, no, this doesn't make sense. Then we talked and we talked more. He admitted there's an aerosol program going on. Now, all the batteries, the alkaline batteries that go in the supermarket, when you finish using them, you put them in a little box or whatever in the supermarket, they come and collect them, whatever.
Yeah.
All of these millions or billions of batteries are being recycled. The main electrolyte in batteries, alkaline batteries, is barium. Plus, of course, you've got exotic batteries with zinc in them and cadmium and lithium and different things. And all these ingredients are recycled and reused, according to this guy. Now, I thought, is he selling me some sort of story? Is he trying to embarrass me? Well, I couldn't see any point to it. But I looked, there are patents for this.
So these recycled batteries wind up in the spraying?
In the atmosphere, yeah, nanoparticles. They basically get burnt in a furnace, and there's a method of harvesting the various different metals, so they can reuse them. And there are various different patents to prove that they can do that. So basically, he was admitting to me that there is a toxic fallout from the aerosols.
Well, I could tell you, Max, here, I've noticed over the last 2 years stunted growth with the grass, the shrubs, the trees. And it's not just me that's noticed that. There's been a few people that I've spoken to, and they said, we're just not mowing the lawn as much as we used to. And it's because, like I said, they spray incessantly here.
And you've got a lot of shade then, of course.
And a lot of shade. Yep, exactly.
Which is not helping. Then you've got the problem with no nutritional uptake because of the toxins.
Yeah.
Interestingly, I've talked to different, what they call arborists, the people that work with trees.
Yeah.
They've all confirmed that they're amazed at how many different diseases are affecting all the trees. And that is indicative of just a general immune breakdown. The trees are not getting enough nutrients to boost themselves up to normal. Normally, the ailments they're suffering with wouldn't affect them, because if they had enough nutrition, then they'd be healthy, and their immune system would deal with these problems. So you're getting a lot of different types of trees suffering different types of illnesses that normally they'd shrug off. Because their immune systems are down, they're suffering.
Max, just going back a little bit, you mentioned the Arctic. What's going on up there? You hear different perspectives and reports. It's getting colder, it's getting warmer. Do you know what's really going on there? Is the ice cap getting larger, smaller?
Well, you can go to, if you look to something to the Arctic cryosphere, you can get the latest satellite picture of the Arctic, and you will find the one I looked at just recently was the 12th of December, I think, or the 14th of December, and it's as big as it ever was. There's no reduction in the Arctic ice cap at the moment. So I think basically what's happening is there is a concerted effort. As I said to you before, the Soviets have been working, or the Russians now, have been working with the Allies in a joint effort to melt the Arctic region, because it's a tipping point. See, because a lot of the ice is on the sea, what their goal is if they can destroy the ice. Now, the different ways they can do that, they openly talked about this before, like in 1945 with Vladimir Swadekin, where they would spray carbon black, and you'll get. That's for different reasons. One of the reasons is, first of all, to turn the ice or snow black, so that it would get more heat from the sun, melt it. Another reason is to put the carbon black into clouds, because then the solar effect on the top of clouds is the cloud warms up, because it's filled with tiny little particles. So that then starts to change. It warms the cloud, and it changes the dynamics of the climate that's going on up there. So basically, you've also got lots of ionospheric heaters, like the famous one, HARP, but there's one in Norway, IceCap 3D at Tomaso. There's one in Suri in Russia. There's one in Finland. There's two in Iceland. There's one in Greenland. They're dotted all over the place. These things can heat up the atmosphere, alter the regions of the atmosphere. They can create sudden stratospheric warming, which then pushes lots of air out. So that's how you get your polar vortex. So what they're doing is trying to draw warm air up to the Arctic region. It's all about trying to create extra cloud, trying to warm the trap heat in, trying to warm the Arctic region, trying to destroy the ice. They've in the past, they've had over 135 nuclear detonations there. And interestingly, a man called Julian Huxley, who was a member of the United Nations, UNESCO, he suggested in 1946, at the beginning of the United Nations, that they should use nuclear weapons to destroy the ice at the Arctic, because they openly wanted to warm the climate. There's lots of documentations right up to the mid-60s where they were looking at every different way they could possibly work to melt the Arctic region, whether it was to use chemicals, to spray oil on the ocean to reduce the amount of ice that could form. And you have to wonder whether or not the deep ocean, the deep horizon thing in the Gulf, whether or not that was something to do with that, because the currents would take all that stuff they sprayed for that oil. They sprayed all sorts of toxins, didn't they, to try and make the oil float and stuff like that. They sprayed millions of gallons of this stuff. Well, that eventually will be washed up to the Arctic region, with the ocean currents take it up to the ocean, up to the Arctic. So there's all sorts of different. If you realise in 1945 that was one of the suggested ways of spraying different chemicals in there to try and reduce the amount of ice. I mean, basically, there's a fight with technology against Mother Nature, but Mother Nature is still winning. You know, they're not able to do entirely what they would like to be able to do. You know, they were hoping that they were going to master their techniques of getting rid of the ice at the Arctic in order that they would work in tandem with their fear campaign about global warming.
And melting the ice or getting the ice out of the way, Max, is one of the premises that this creates shipping lanes and
access to resources. Not only that, by warming up the ocean, basically removing the ice, what you've got an opportunity for is the land ice also to recede. Now, there's vast tracts of land, huge parts of Russia, of Alaska, Canada, of Greenland. Greenland is the largest island in the world, not including the continent of Australia, but Greenland's the largest island in the world. So you've got huge amounts of territory they would like to, if they could warm up the climate, they could start to access, start to plunder, basically. You know, we're looking at a resource grab.
Okay.
You know, there's no doubt. I mean, they openly talked about that was on the shipping lanes is a big thing, because you know, like the whole of the Americas, you've got the Panama Canal, or you have to go all the way round. Well, if you've got the Arctic blocked for like 9 months of the year because of the sea ice, that leaves you the Panama Canal or going down to the Cape Horn, I think it is, you know, which is really rough seas, and it's a long way round, you know. And unfortunately, the way that the governments have been, or the elites have been working over the last 50 years, you've had a massive deindustrialization, a destabilization, an austerity plan to strip jobs from the West, which means the West, including America and Europe, are dependent on imports from the East. So shipping is vital, you know. So this is really, really important for them. That's one part of it. But it's also that the Arctic is one of those areas where if they can tip it, that will affect the climate globally. So they want to create the catastrophe because that will justify all their actions. You know, they need it, but they're up against a race against time, because although they tend to ignore this, there are several scientists that do address this. There's the obvious reason that the climate changes is because of the sun, and the sun's activities are in perfect correlation with the changes in climate. Now, we're heading towards a big change in solar activity, a decrease, and we're going to enter a cold period. So they're racing to get their legislation in place so they can begin spraying publicly, overtly, if you like, with solar radiation management, so they can claim that, yeah, it's all working, because whether they like it or not, the sun's activity would indicate that we're going to enter a period of cooling, which may last 20 or 30 years. But, it doesn't mean that we won't have summer or anything. It just means that, it's going to get longer winters or
right.
a bit or whatever. So that will limit their access for the resources to the Arctic. So they believe if they can tip that balance in the Arctic, it's a bit. There's a phrase they use in previous documentations about controlling the weather. They will control all the things which are uncontrollable. What that means is things that vary quite a lot, things that are very rigid, you won't be able to control that, because those are too rigid. But the things which are flexible, the things which are have a tipping point, they call it a force multiplier, where basically if you can alter that a little bit, then there's a big effect. So the Arctic, they believe, if they can get rid of the ice, that will have a big effect. That'll be a major tipping point.
It's like they're out of their minds. They really are.
These people, they openly admit, it goes back to something called the Age of Enlightenment, like late 17th century, rolling over to the 18th century. All the scientists and philosophers of the day, and all the aristocrats and all the people that mattered at that time as far as power, they got together and they've been working out for decades, how can we control every aspect of life on this planet? And they've never lost that ideology that they're working towards, to control everything on this planet. And they want to I suppose, be like gods. They want to have total control, and that they want us to be in servitude to them. And they really do want that. People have got to realise we are free-range slaves now, but what they want is much worse.
Well, free-range slaves with a depopulation agenda, right? I mean, they're looking to have a whole lot less humans walking around.
Well, I can assure you, anyone can do this search. If they look for the fertility rates of women for any nation, just have a look at all nations, the fertility rates. You will find that at least 2/3 of all nations have 2.1 or less fertility rate.
Yeah.
And that would require every woman to decide to have children, and between all of the women to average out 2.1. So, I mean, let's face it, we all know that not all women have children. So we're in a worse state. If the fertility rate is only 2.1, it means that what we've really got is something called a demographic time bomb. And what that means is we're going to end up with too many old people, and they'll say, it's because we're living longer, right? Now, I'll tell you something about living longer. Where I live in France, as in many places in France, it's mostly a rural-based living in France. Loads of historical little villages. You've got a few big cities, but really it's all spread out in the countryside. And you've got all these lovely old churches that are 1,000 years old, very historical place. And I found it fascinating to have a look around the graveyards and just have a look. So what was the average age of people dying? 100. 96, 92. It's like, hang on a second. I thought we were, I thought we were all supposed to be living longer than ever before. I think there's a little bit of a porky pie going on here. There's no difference in how long people were living. I mean, obviously some people die young. Things did happen, but overall, the oldest people were still pretty old. It's all a bit of a lie. But because people aren't reproducing, and I've noticed it in my generation, I'm 45, I've had friends that have had to resort to IVF to conceive. And, that's not uncommon.
Right.
In fact, it's a growing area, isn't it? And you can see, well, this is a bit of a coincidence. You've got things like cloning, you've got things like test tube babies, you've got IVF treatment, and you've got infertility. Put it all together, what have you got, really? You've got a situation where you've got population control, and then you can sanction who can have a baby and who can't have a baby, and will that baby have the qualities the establishment want for the future. A bit like one of those predictive programming movies like Gattaca, which is a good movie if people can't see where genetic engineering might be a problem for the future. Watch that and realise that. I think that's tame compared to what they've actually got planned. But it's basically people will be only able to have children if they're allowed to. If the state says, yeah, okay, you can reproduce. And when you do reproduce, the chances are it'll be by artificial means. And then there'll be bloody doctoring your child.
Now, Max, are you seeing a meaningful shift in people's awareness? In other words, is the rate and pace?
I think it's amazing.
It's amazing. Okay.
Yes, it's amazing. I honestly, there are times when you get overwhelmed and get fed up, and you go through all the emotions when you wake up. And, it can be very disappointing, you get angry, get frustrated, get depressed, you get all of that. And in the end, you just think, all right, I've got to do something. So you become positive. But when I was trying to raise awareness 3 years ago, I've been doing this full time for 3 years now. There were a few people that were awake, and there was enough to sort of make me think, okay, I'll carry on with this. There was enough feedback to think, okay, I'm answering my calling, I'll do this. But these days, I can literally park my van up at the big supermarket in the town. I live 28 kilometres or 30 kilometres from a town. And when I go to the big supermarket there, I always get someone wanting a discussion because they've seen my van. It's not the same person. It's all different people. Basically, people are approaching me. They already know about chemtrails. They already know things are going on with the establishment, illegal wars, or whatever issue is important to them. There's so many different converging issues. And I am amazed in the last 6 months or a year, the number of people who are informed or have an idea already. I feel really encouraged. It keeps me going, I guess, because, anyone who wakes up, it's quite daunting.
Oh, yeah.
The reality of the matrix, if you like. And it is, I guess, it's a reasonable term to use, the matrix, because we are living in a control grid. It's overwhelming and it's quite hard going. And how do you figure? How do you move forward? What's your future going to be? You can't get off the roller coaster, because you can't. Once your eyes are open, there's no going back.
That's the thing. Yeah.
But what keeps me going is the number of people who are waking up, and amazingly, like I say, in rural France, if I talk to people in rural France and they know what's going on, farmers know what's going on, if they are willing to wake up, or at least be aware enough to make me feel I'm not babbling a load of information to them that's going over their head. They're really taking it in. They're coming back with the right questions. I realise I'm sowing a seed, and I don't try to overwhelm people when I just meet someone for the first time and they're asking questions, because I've seen that too many times where you can see people, it hits them too hard. It's best to try and sow a few seeds and walk away before you overwhelm them. But people are already, what's remarkable is people are already waking up to ideas. They're already aware of it and coming to me for the next level of information. And that I find really encouraging, especially in rural France. I think it's a collective effort, isn't it? So many people are doing everything they can. And I think that pays off. That's what makes me think that it's participation is the key. People participate. If people say, no, I'm not taking this, and actually I'm going to do what I can, whatever I can, doesn't matter if it's big or small, everything does have an effect. And if anyone's listening out there and they think, I don't know if I want to go to conferences, I don't want to paint my van up, I'm not going to do that, fair enough. That's okay. But you can always jump on the phone every now and again and make a phone call to someone, or you can just have a discussion with people you meet, or, you can bring it up, point something out in the sky. Good way to do it is just take your camera into the city centre, and when they're chemtrailing, just start taking photographs of the sky. And I can do that now, and people will start talking to me about chemtrails.
Right. And I tell people, Max, quite honestly, you could start a website, you could do a blog or Facebook groups. there's a lot of ways that people can get involved.
Yeah.
I do the radio shows. I've only been doing this a year. And if you had said to me previous to this last year that I would be doing something like this, I would have said, no, I wouldn't, but I am, because something has to get done, and it's my way of being able to get the word out.
If you said before you're getting up to 20,000 people visiting your blog and
Yep.
every month, that's fantastic. That's great traffic, isn't it? You know, that's making a massive difference. That's huge. And this is what it takes, you know. I mean, I've noticed as well, because, you know, a lot of people in the establishment, they're busy working. They're doing whatever they're doing. And it's not until you pester them and say, hey, I want you to pay attention to this. This concerns me. They are obliged to think, oh, I want to get voted in again. I'm going to listen to these people. If enough people start pestering them, then they'll have to raise it, you know. And my experience, I have contacted a lot of politicians. My experience is most of them don't know what's going on and just deal with what they need to focus on until it comes into their horizon. You know, so bring it into their horizon, push it into their agenda, because most of them are unaware of the bigger picture, because, you know, everyone's compartmentalized and no one needs, you know, someone need to know. If everyone knew, it would bubble out, wouldn't it? Bubble out of control, but they keep it tightly controlled. So we can make a difference by getting everybody to push this public concern, raise public concern, pressure your public representative.
Some great advice, Max, and well said. And with that, we are leaning into the 90-minute mark, and I want to be very respectful of your time because you've been so generous. And I do want to say that the conversation has been absolutely fabulous. Your insights and perspectives are extremely informed, and I am very happy that we've connected. And so with that, Max, where can our listeners find your work and connect with you? I know that you have your YouTube channel.
It's the Real Institute dash Max Bliss. I think most people, if you did a Google, an internet search for Max Bliss, you'd find me. But I'm on Facebook. I think I might merge my public page and personal profile together just to have one point of access there. I'm on YouTube, and I've got a blog. I've got an older blog which has got good information on it that's worth a visit, called mrmaxbliss.wordpress.com, which has got. I did an article called Corpus Delicti, which was I was a victim of a chemtrail whistleblower hoax, which lasted about a month long, and at one point I was hook, line, and sinker, and I thought that it was quite genuine. But they were sharing information with me by email, and because I'm not a pilot and because I'm not a mechanic or anything to do that, I wasn't sure how good the information was, whether or not it's genuine. So this dragged out for a month. So I've written a long article about that, but it prompted me to research a lot of information. So I've shared a lot of information in this article, and I think there's quite a lot of good information there that's worthwhile having a look at. And my latest blog, which I'm starting to do, but I'm not very technically minded, and my time is kind of limited. I need to manage my time better. But my new blog is therealinstitute.com with hyphens in between the words. So it's the-real-institute.com. And I guess that's pretty much where you can find me.
Okay, well, Max, again, you can come back anytime. I'm telling you, this was really an excellent conversation. You got into such great detail, especially, you know, a lot of the historic aspects, and so I really enjoyed the discussion with you.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, thank you for having me on. And we're against the clock, you know. This is the year. This is our year, make or break. Because in December, they've already scheduled in Paris, they're going to sign this legally binding treaty.
Yeah.
So, but I'm attending a conference in March at Cambridge University and Ken Caldera and David Keefe will be there. So I should be rubbing them up and having a chat with them and seeing how the land lies, because I'm basically putting them on notice. If you don't know something's going on, then you're either grossly incompetent or you are willfully ignorant. You know what's going on. So I will be challenging them, and then later in July, there's another one again at Cambridge, but it's the most important conference, they say, before the Paris one. So I'm just hoping that I can reach some of the climate scientists and just share enough information with them to get them to rethink, because I really believe we can destabilise them.
So, Max, would you be willing to come back on the show after the March and the July conferences just to give us an update?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, great. All right. All right, Mr. Bliss, it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, it's nice to talk to you. Thank you.
And that concludes my interview with Max Bliss, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. Max's website is The Real Institute, and you can get there by typing in therealinstitute.com. That's THE-REAL-institute.com. His YouTube channel is also The Real Institute, and he is also on Facebook. Please see the show notes below for any additional links. And as always, I'd like to thank everyone for listening and visiting the blog, The Sage of Quay. Also, if you get a moment, please take a listen to my album, Leaving Dystopia, by heading over to laboroflovemusic.com. And remember, live in truth and always serve creation. It's really that simple. See everyone next week. Be safe, enjoy, and God bless.